Yep. Yep. There we are. Hello. All right. Let's get this going. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for coming. And hopefully, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah. All right. Great. I just can't hear me. That's fun. All right. Welcome. I'm glad all of you took time out of your day to come hear us talk about sensitive data, something that is riveting, I'm sure. My LinkedIn information, if you're so inclined, feel free to connect. Always like meeting with people that are interested in the fun stuff like Databricks data and sensitive data. A little bit about myself. I am a member of Avanade's Global Center of Excellence, focusing on Databricks. I'm a Databricks champion. And as you can guess, I like Databricks. I also hold a doctorate in computer science. My concentration was on big data analytics. I'm also, in my spare time, both a Databricks instructor and also a university instructor teaching AI classes at a master's level. Not too fast. The fun slide. This is a link to a book I published or had published back in December. Focuses on building lake houses using Databricks. It's a lake house cookbook. If you're so inclined, go take a look. It's a pretty good value. These are some of the animals from a farm that I own. We have, it's that time of year, so we have babies. So a little cuteness to brighten up your day. Some sheep in the middle, a goat on the left side, or I'm sorry, goats in the middle, sheep on the left side, and a calf at the bottom on the right next to his dad, a Dexter bull. So the purpose of this conversation is to talk a bit about sensitive data. In particular, this is in conjunction with a white paper that I wrote over the past few months that has been shared and reviewed by Databricks along with various other people inside of Avanade. And the idea is to bring into kind of focus the problem, talk about it in a clear way, come up with a very precise set of terminologies, and also, if nothing else, getting you to think about it from perhaps a slightly different angle and a slightly different perspective. And it is around making sure that we can leverage some of the capabilities such as offshore capabilities when we're doing things like building advanced models and techniques such as ML, AI, as well as our traditional data engineering activities. So the kind of stuff that is in the white paper, and I'm not going to talk about all this stuff, but this is kind of the outline, and it goes clockwise, starts at the 1 o'clock position, if you will, and goes around. We're going to talk about this part of it because, well, we'd be here for a while if we go over the whole thing and I drain every slide, and it's like 30 pages of a white paper. We don't want to be here that long. I don't want to be here that long, and I'm sure you don't either. So when we start off, it's like, what are the challenges and why do we talk about it and why is it so important? And it comes down to, it's a special thing and we need special tools and special approaches to dealing with it. And in particular, unlike some of the things that we do, even at an enterprise level, the cost of failure is very high compared to some things where it may not be that big a deal if you do something. Whenever you're dealing with data that is sensitive in nature, it can be quite problematic if you do something that lets it slip out, become exposed to the internet or to the dark web or whatever it might be. So in short, you don't want to mess it up. And there's also some common challenges that you have to deal with, regulatory stuff, FERPA, HIPAA, the various alphabet soup of legislative sort of stuff. And also dealing with not offshore development teams as well as controls, both onshore and offshore. And when you deal with unstructured data, in particular, things like clinicians' notes or whatever, where it's potentially unstructured, it can be much more challenging to deal with because it might not look like it contains sensitive data until the last sentence, and then perhaps something important is revealed through the discussion inside of that narrative. So there's lots of solutions that people come up with to try to address these challenges. right? And this is just kind of surveying the state of the industry as it is today. Oftentimes use the 3-environment approach, dev, QA, prod, pick your name, but that's basically what it is. And you may be doing something like some form of protecting it, be it anonymization and so on. We'll talk about what that is a little bit later on. But you have some means of addressing and dealing with it. And then you also may do simple things like make sure that certain environments don't have certain data. So you may limit it by environment. That can be quite challenging, especially in situations where you may not have data across all of the environments, because sometimes, and a lot of times, frankly, there's no real dev system that corresponds to some of your big systems like Epic. You may have one system that is the source of truth. And so that's one sort of challenge that you may deal with. So it may not be as simple as just environmental controls. And also you may be doing things like file or table level access. Generally, you're not going to go down to column. You may be, but generally not. So, and in the past, with prior to some of the really cool stuff that Databricks is releasing, you may not have had that opportunity. It may have been very challenging to do. And also, you may be using things like clean rooms, which were discussed a little bit in today and will be tomorrow. And that's basically a Databricks sort of technology that lets you work together with somebody else in a very controlled fashion. You may or may not be using that. So when we talk about the traditional 3-tier approach or 3-environment approach, dev, QA, prod, or you may have a different name for them, but that's basically what they are. And you'll typically have data that's flowing into your production environment, and you may be anonymizing it or sampling it or shuffling it or various other things when you take it to a lower level environment. You'll notice here I've drawn in some things like metadata driven systems. Hopefully you're using those. If you're not, take some time and become familiar with them. The basic idea is to, rather than writing a whole bunch of notebooks, instead you write metadata that is then in turn turned into the operations or realizes the operations you're trying to perform. So some definitions. It's important to have clear terminology when you're talking about stuff, especially stuff where there's potentially a fair amount of overload of terminology. The terminology I use in the white paper is actual to define data that came from originally some sort of a production sort of source in the historical way of thinking about it. This is data that's actually being produced, play on words, if you will, that is around your customers, your patients, your whatever. It is the real data. Sensitive data is likely a subset of your actual data. That's data that has something in it that people would take an interest in if you were to become exposed. So it's things like PII, PHI, and so on. And it's something that it merits special treatment. And then a protection mechanism is some way of handling that sensitive data. So it may be something where you're anonymizing. There's various types of them, and we'll talk more about them. So a key thing, and this is something to start changing the way we may talk and think, is to distinguish between environments and catalogs. So Databricks with Unity Catalog does some amazing stuff. And one of the things that I say in the paper, and I will stand by, is that Databricks has consistently undersold what Unity Catalog can do. It is revolutionary in this space, and it should be viewed at the same level as something like Azure Active Directory in the Azure world. It is very significant in nature. So if we start thinking about environments or work streams or places where you do stuff, that's a distinct change from the data on which you're doing that stuff. So you may be doing development against actual data. Not that unusual, people do it. It's a choice to do. And it may make sense in your situation, provided proper controls are in place, along with logging and auditing and all the good stuff that we've come to trust. And there's various sort of approaches that you may use on your catalog data to protect it, if you will, or to make it so where you're not at too much risk. You may do things like create synthetic data. You may anonymize it. You may use pseudo-anonymized and so on. And then there's also this ordering, if you will, of environments. And I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly because this is old hat. Dev, test, production. But generally when you're dealing with catalogs, you want to think of groups, not people. Hopefully everybody is using groups. Make your group assignment based upon business function. Who has a reason to be using certain stuff? And then make sure that you can take them out of the group and also keep track of what the group is doing. And you may actually want to turn groups off en masse. When you're dealing with sensitive data, this is sort of a decision tree or a flow chart, if you will, that I made that basically is thinking about, can you physically segregate the data? If you can or you want to, you're done, right? You just segregate it and life is good. You may want to not segregate it. And then the question is, do you want to preserve the original values? If you do, and the bottom is there any chance in the middle bottom kind of decision point, is there any chance that something may access your data outside of Unity catalog? If there is a chance, then you want to be doing some encryption, because if you're relying on the mechanism to protect it that could be circumvented, that's not going to go well. And in particular, things like Fabric may play into that. So it's something to think about. There will be a performance hit for encryption and decryption, but you go into it knowing that, and the people accessing it know it as well. Another sort of way of thinking about how you want to protect your data, and it's around kind of the various branches of, do you want to be able to undo it and get it back? And there's a whole lot of choices, but they kind of fall into these sort of approaches, or these categories, if you will. There's also these data scientists and AI folks that are always a problematic sort of thing. What this is proposing is that they get their own catalog, right? And call it whatever you want to, data science, whatever else, but give them a catalog that only somebody in that role has access to. Inside of that, give each individual person their own schema that only they can get to. And by doing that, you're making sure that they have a place that is the appropriate place to handle and to store sensitive data. So they might get data from an actual environment, decrypt it, and then write it into their own schema as something to do in an interim fashion. But the idea there is to make sure that you're always using proper controls and not circumventing it. One of the things that we do with a protection mechanism is replace it with synthetic data. But synthetic data has some challenges that go with it. And they're well known. If you've dealt with synthetic data, if you're populating relational systems, you make sure you do your foreign key relationships right. If it's just randomly generated, its predictive power is it's negative, right? Basically, it's not there because it's random. You're training on noise. Now, if what you're doing is creating essentially a data engineering activity that happens to be training a model, that's a different story, and you may not care that you're dealing with synthetic data. But if you're trying to train on the data, you want to be very cautious because, well, it's going to be gibberish, right? Because it's just randomness. Various solutions, and there are a lot of them, but the solution that I propose uses Unity Catalog. In particular, the fact that there's a 3-level namespace, that's really important. Applying tags is also important. And also, obviously, granting is an access control mechanism. The column mask function is pretty important. We're likely going to hear more about attribute-based access control. As it becomes more available, you're going to want to shift your focus to that. And then Active Directory and DevOps, very important as well to the solution. So whenever you're doing your organization, think about the stuff that you need to organize. And it's going to be related to kind of what are you doing with it? What is the business purpose that you're doing? Could be you're doing software engineering in the form of data engineering. It could be that you're doing some sort of data workload, such as AI, ML, whatever. Where did it come from? You're likely going to want to consider that in the sources. as well as what have you done to it, especially if you're following the lakehouse architecture with the medallion architecture. You're going to want to know what you've done to it. So is it gold, silver, bronze, whatever? Whenever you're using that information, you're likely going to want to organize the naming of stuff, tables as an example, based upon it. Here's one possible approach you may want to use. Again, it's going to be specific to your organization and your needs. But an important thing to think about is that it's going to change after you reach the silver zone. Once you're into the silver zone, where you've done the bronze to silver mapping for all of the source tables, how you're going to do it or how you're going to organize it is going to shift over to data products away from data sources. So you'll want to think about these things. If nothing else, don't assume that I know what I'm talking about, but at least have the conversation about these sort of topics of how you organize, have a plan. You'll thank me later, right? And then whenever we're constructing it, you probably want to think about your actual environment like this, and you want a pre-prod environment. The purpose of pre-prod is to make sure you know how to deploy to prod, basically, is what it comes down to at the end of the day. So making sure that you've got a means of going from one environment to another. And then the same thing is true when you're going from dev to QA. The point of that exchange is to make sure that whenever you put it into QA, that it actually works like you think it should, right? Because that's what you're trying to accomplish. Then you stick them together where you're basically going to go from a synthetic environment, likely, which is the dev and QA, which I kind of skipped over back here because this is likely synthetic data, because you're likely doing data engineering activities, data and software engineering activities. So once you've got them stitched together, you're going to want to rely extensively on DevOps and automation, right? 4 workspaces or 4 environments. Oh my, how are we going to do that? DevOps, that's how you're going to do that. And you may even go a bit further to where you're combining this into a legacy or an existing environment. So you may have a 3-tier environment that has been around forever, and then you're bringing in an offshore presence with pure synthetic data for data engineering activities, as well as testing of data engineering activities. And with that, the recommendation, use synthetic data in lower environments. You do want to encrypt or anonymize whenever you're in QA, and so on. So if you leave it in the clear, make sure nothing can circumvent any controls that you have in place. Unity Catalog is an amazing thing. Learn all you can about it. I know I am. And with that, thank you.